I will also posit that her Daphne Blake in Scooby-Doo is very much this Buffy.
Okay, that's fair. Like, I'm not trying to make too hard of a stance on this one.
Do you guys hear that? Case hates Sarah Michelle Gellar. He hates it.
And he loves Kristy Swanson.
Loves Republican Kristy Swanson.
Oh man,
I'm sorry to Case.
Anyone who knew me in high school is going to be like, "What the fuck is he talking about?" Because he had such a crush on Sarah Michelle Gellar in high school.
I mean, like, I still have a crush on Sarah Michelle Gellar, and I'm not even into women.
Welcome to Certain POV's Another Pass podcast with Case and Sam, where we take another look at movies that we find fascinating but flawed. Let's see how we could have fixed them.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Alsea.
Hi.
And today we are driving a stake through the heart of an underrated film. Today we are talking about the 1992 cult classic Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And to do that, I could think of no one better than to be joined by Matthew Ryan Limerick.
Hi, I'm back. Hi, friends.
Hi.
Hello.
It's so good to have you back on. Now, in reality, I just did an episode of your show yesterday, so I was just talking to you.
Literally 24 hours ago. But like that is the wibbly-wimey, such the best part of podcast time is like, did they record this 2 days ago? Have they recorded 4 episodes in 2 days? Was this recorded a year ago? Who knows? That's for us to know.
But it's great having you back on. It's been a while. It was actually episode 101, so Sam's technical first episode.
Yes.
The last time you were on.
Yes.
So we are a full year and then some since then.
We are. Lots has happened. That was Pokemon. Yeah, that was the Pokemon
Yep.
thing.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Very fun.
An emotional journey.
An emotion. Of course.
Told the best way possible.
With animated dog fighting. No, I'm
Absolutely. with a slightly, with a slightly unethical, maybe made us question our whole childhoods.
It's true.
Yeah.
Point of view.
It's absolutely true.
Beloved video game.
Absolutely.
But today we're not talking about animated dogfighting. Today we're talking about a movie that was critically panned at the time it came out. And then a couple years later, a TV show spinoff was launched. And I was like, really? Okay. And then that became a cultural phenomenon that launched the careers of so many people and put a certain person on the map that, is complicated. So this is going to be an interesting conversation because, like,
absolutely.
Let's just say the name and get it out the way because we're not going to not be able to say the name. Joss Whedon. Fucking Joss Whedon. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer was Joss Whedon's first big screenplay. He sold it after working in television for a while. And then Joss Whedon is not good at working with teams of people. Like he really cannot be a team player. He can boss people around, but he has a hard time working with people, and walked off the set of this movie when they started making changes because it's a movie and people make changes. And then he spent his entire career bad-mouthing this movie. So there's a lot to say about this, but a lot of it is colored by the lens of the Buffy TV show fandom accepting Joss being like, fuck this movie. And so there's a lot of people who just kind of hate this movie just because it's not the show. And that's kind of a bummer because I like this movie.
Well, and he still did something really important, which is they still reference what happens in this movie as to why Buffy goes to Sunnydale. Like, they retcon a lot, but they keep this very intact. And they even, the Sarah Michelle Gellar Buffy even references Pike and like losing Merrick in the TV show. So, it's one of those things that he can hate it all he wants, but it honestly really grounded that there was a before. And I think that's what makes the Buffy series, especially season 1, because it's a little rocky. It was hard to get people on board. And having those two connections, even though you don't have to have seen this before you watch season 1, giving it a background and still considering it canon within the larger scope, I think it's important storytelling wise to who Buffy ultimately is.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, like, yes, he spent a lot of time bad-mouthing it, but being Joss Whedon and being the person of ego that he is, it was at least his first creation. So he still had to reference it slightly and keep it in the loop, even if he hated, and he would say very often, oh, it was my idea and it was wonderful, but it was distorted. And now with the show, I'm getting to do what I want to do. And I mean, on some level, that's valid. That's valid. That's fine. You're getting to do what you want to do. You're creating what you want to do. But this film is phenomenal. This film is ridiculous, and it is not perfect. There's definitely things that could be fixed in it. But as I said before we even started rolling, this is the best cinematic death scene ever. Best vampire slay ever. And I will die on that hill 5 minutes straight, making faces, falling to the ground, saying, "He died a valiant death." And I will be happy about it because I enjoy it. I enjoyed it still to this day. Dying.
And then when you die on that hill and we have your funeral, we will play the Ghostbusters theme as per your request.
Yes, please. Please have an orchestra, string quartet. I don't care. Make it classy.
We have to. We absolutely have to. Absolutely.
Yeah. Would also expect gospel chorus, just a bunch of random performers, just all singing. You don't even have to make an arrangement, guys. It can be from the heart. It's fine.
So I had this thought while watching this movie this time that really similar to our conversation about Batman and Robin, that it just came out kind of at the wrong time and it wasn't really reading the room for what people wanted at the time. Like, I was thinking about how this movie, like, I got real Return of the Living Dead vibes on this rewatch, because there's this camp fun kind of aspect going on to it all. Like, there's this 80s goofiness to it, but that's also not how, like, we had sort of moved into, like, displaying these kind of horror things by this point. This is the same year that Bram Stoker's Dracula came out. This is a time where, like the Tim Burton aesthetic had started to take over a lot of stuff where, like, people kind of wanted, like, a bit, darker, but not necessarily, like, serious dark, but, like, goth camp is what I think people wanted. And this movie's not really doing that. It's doing, or at least not the 90s version of that, I should say. Like, there isn't a lot of leather, for example, would be a thing that I would really imagine seeing if they were, like, really trying to read the room. Because, like, compare this with, like, Blade. Like, Blade came out the year before The Matrix. It looks a lot like The Matrix. It looks a lot like the action movies of the time. So all of those elements of it kind of, like, it fit together. And this one feels like it should have been, like, 5 years earlier.
Or 2 years later. Because it feels very much like it is... like that it's referencing Clueless before Clueless has come out, but it also...
Right, it's 3 years before Clueless, which is so weird.
But it's also it's so self-referential to Valley Girl with Julie Brown that came out in 1983. Like, it is so... Like, this has such an Earth Girls Are Easy vibe to me that I think works when you go fully camp. But at some point, I don't think anyone went, what we're doing is camp. I think it just became camp. And, because it's also like, I love that you reference leather, because for me, there's an iconic moment in this movie, and it's when she puts on Pike's jacket for the first time.
Yeah.
And she's in that white dress, because they literally reference it in the finale of season 1 when she's going to fight the Master. I was going to call it the first, but that is not the first. The first comes that's season 7.
First comes later.
That's a very different season.
That's a very different season.
Very different.
That's a journey.
Oh, and there's a lot of... Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about it. We're slick.
Yeah, we'll talk about
it. But it's that to me. And so it's funny, like, I so inherently associate Buffy with leather, whether it's the red leather pants or the black leather jacket. Also because Faith wears the leather vest, she has a leather jacket. Spike is always in that duster. Even when we see the 1970s Slayer, she is in leather. It just intrinsically, also it was fashion of the late 90s.
Yeah.
But leather, I think it's so funny to reference that, because leather, also like Vampire Willow, Drusilla, Angelus.
All the vampires.
Literally all the vampires.
All the vampires.
All of them.
And none of them wear leather in this movie.
No. Well, and it's funny because even like Harmony is so soft, and then she becomes a vampire, and then suddenly it's like leather dresses, and you're like...
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. They just get the memo when they wake up with the demon. The demon just craves leather.
Well, I just feel like there's like maybe a vampire stylist that's just behind it. Like, oh, I'm sorry, you have fangs now?
Yeah.
No, you have to wear this.
Yeah, you have to wear flesh so that you can consume flesh.
It's true. Yeah, it's like they have to go and have like an orientation. It all happens ethereally before they wake up in the casket again.
It's actually the work uniform. We expect you to be in work attire at all times when hunting.
It vaguely sounds like going through theme park initiation, honestly, and so I'm a little scarred by that, but I love it. I just love that it's broken down that way. But yeah, you have to have leather, vampires in leather. Like it's just kind of par for the course. Even in Twilight, they were in leather at different points. So like it's just par for the course.
90s vampires especially. You know, like that's again like Lothos feels like a Bela Lugosi type vampire. And I just don't feel like the audience was there for that type of vampire in 1992.
Okay, but that cape, I'm just
with like the extensions, like, yeah, no,
it's beautiful.
Well, but even because you thinking about, because 90s was nothing but a vampire resurgence, because we also had Kindred the Embraced, which is the Vampire the Masquerade series, even though it kind of failed.
This was the apex of the Anne Rice vampire.
Absolutely. Like, so it's one of those things that I think the cape works and is beautiful if you're referencing like Gary Oldman handled it so beautifully as Dracula in Bram Stoker. It's Gary Oldman, right? Am I not? Yeah, Gary Oldman. And so there is still a regal danger to him, but it's also like you can tell this movie costumes was not in the budget. They didn't. So a lot of it's very costumey, and honestly, the like young vampires work better because they look like everybody else, just with the really cringy prosthetics. Like, so I think it's one of those things that like he could have been a really Lothos could have been a really terrifying like villain, but because he was in a different movie than everybody else.
Right.
Like, you know, it's one of those things when your actor doesn't get the memo, like, because even he looks different than the layer that he wakes up in. Like that layer is fucking cool and very on par for the series that would come later. But like, yeah, I love the cape, but it's very Hollywood costume and makeup. Like it's like they walked in and bought it from a costume shop.
Rewatching it this time, like you brought up the finale of season 1, and I kept thinking about season 1's finale as almost like a redux of this movie, or particularly the third act of it. And the thing I missed the most from that finale that I really wanted in this movie was the running joke of "I like your dress." Mm-hmm. That was in that finale where everyone, including the Master, after he like. Spoiler for the season 1 finale of Buffy.
It's been 25 years, Case. It's fine. 25 years. This is literally to celebrate the 25th.
Right. Yeah. So when the Master kills Buffy, she gets better, but he kills her at the end. Like he then says, "I like your dress." And that's like the rule of 3 for the sequence of people saying that they like her dress, which was like a nice element in there because that's the balance of the poppy popular girl kind of vibe along within the vampire stuff, which is like that tension between those two is the whole point of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
Also, it's something that, again, the Master does feel very reduxy in many ways, but only because there is this, it's the thing that Ralph Fiennes does as Voldemort that I also think works very well, is when there is this weird, like, regal aristocracy sticking to rules of decorum when it comes to being like a master villain that's lived for forever. The Master had very much this like level of class and decorum that he is the raging evil, but there is just like a genteelism to him, even with this idea of like he is so evil and such an old vampire that like he's just
He's grotesque.
He's grotesque, which is why he needs the newer vampires to do his bidding. But that's also why it's almost more, that alone is scarier than what we got with Lothos, just because you can see that he's in like powder white foundation and like bad, like he doesn't even have the prosthetics. He's in a Dance of the Vampire Michael Crawford costume. Like, it's just one of those things that even the slight changes they made with the Master, even though it's more or less the same story, those things alone made him so much scarier. The fact that also that they kind of had to come to him, that he was growing in power, but like was still there's a frailness with his age and kind of how he must ascend back to power.
Yeah. I think also like intrinsically the big issue in the film with Lothos is just like he just seems like kind of a creepy dude, right? Like,
yeah,
like he's just kind of like a creepy old man that may or may not have a thing for the Slayer, because he's not like, he has an opportunity really to take her out, like in the middle of the movie, and he doesn't do it. And Merrick just kind of runs in and is like, no, not yet. She's not ready. I was like, what is she, a ham? Like, you're waiting for her to be completely like non-pink in the center? Like, what is going on? And it was just kind of like Merrick knows, like, oh, you won't have as much excitement fighting her now because she's not ready for it. And it was just kind of like this weird thing. And that's what they do so well in the first season, is it's not that Buffy's not ready, it's that the Master's not ready because he's growing in power. And
right.
so
Well, he's trapped.
Right. And he's trapped. And so that kind of in the film doesn't really work because you don't really fully explain what the obsession is for Lothos to the Slayer. Like, why is it more important to just possess the Slayer? Is this like weird, campy, sexual? Like, is this like, I have to own the Slayer? Or is it like, if the Slayer hits a certain point and I drink her blood and I drink her dry, then I'm imbued with some sort of extra powers? But there's no really like through line that tells me what the case is and why he has to wait. Like, you know, like if she's just like a vintage of fine wine that has to sit on the shelf for a certain amount of years, then I get it. And a simple line of being like, she's not 18 yet. Ah, damn, that's not the right vintage yet. I'll have to wait, you know? But that doesn't happen, right? Like that, so it's just like kind of awkward. And that makes Lothos kind of this weird, just middle ground. He's just there. He's set dressing. He's there to play a violin and decide that they're going to a party. And that's basically it. Because the scene that's kind of, or that does work, that is kind of creepy, is the scene when she's in her bedroom and she takes a red ribbon and she ties it in her hair nice and slowly, and it's so beautifully done. And then she walks ethereally to her bed and she turns off the light. And I was thinking, I don't know, like you've just spent a lot of time like learning about it. I don't know if I'd be able to turn off the light, but she turns off the light and she goes to her bed and you clearly see a man in her bed, but she does not react to it. And she lies down and as if it's her bed. And then she's just there laying and cuddling up to Lothos. And it's so eerie. It's so weird. And it speaks to this relationship that is never quite developed. Like this idea that he's like kind of seducing her in her mind, which we get a lot with vampires, right? Reaching out through dreams. But it's never really followed.
Yeah, there's like a throwaway line later where he says, "You and I are linked," that sort of implies that. And you get this whole element of like whenever she confronts him, he's so mesmerizing, but they don't explain it all. Like one thing I kept thinking about in this movie was that they don't lay out the rules of vampires. And like, you know, it's kind of a trope that all like vampire fiction kind of has to lay out the rules of their vampires for it. But like, this is the movie where that should happen because she's a vampire slayer. So like we should have a sequence explaining like, all right, so here's the deal on vampires. They can't go out in sun because they'll burn. Like they can't come inside without inviting you because of like supernatural restrictions. And that could be a time to explain like how this like reincarnation element that is not present in the later Buffy material, but like that Buffy is sort of either being reincarnated, like the Slayers keeps on being reincarnated, or that at the very least that they can feel the memories or the presence of the previous Slayers, and that Merrick keeps being reincarnated with his memories. You know, like explain all that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yes.
I mean, they kind of do. Sort of. They just don't explain it to Buffy.
It's all so creepy, though. Like, it's just two older men obsessing over a teenage girl, and it's really gross the whole time. Yeah. And
it's so bad that she's explicitly in high school, and it's Rutger Hauer, like, just looking like a full-on, like, creepy old man, and, like... You know, vampire prosthetics sometimes just makes it just like a little bit creepier when they're like, doing anything kind of lusty, and they've got these like fake teeth like kind of popping out of their mouths. And like part of that's always vampire stuff anyway, but it's just like lewder when it's, you know, a high school girl.
Yeah. I mean, even Pike is an adult.
Yeah. I mean, so there's always Luke Perry jokes.
He's closer in age, but he's also already an adult. I mean, yes, he's Luke Perry, but like he's definitely in his 20s. Like he's definitely an adult. He definitely should not be spending all of his time hanging out with a high school cheerleader.
Yeah. I mean, they don't spell it out. And like, you know, like there's the difference of Luke Perry, who had gotten famous for playing a high school kid despite being in his like late 20s at the time. And like there's like that element going on. But like Kristy Swanson's also 22 in this. It's not, you know, like Buffy's supposed to be a senior, so she's 18. I could see Pike as being like a 20-year-old, and it's like not that gross. But like the bigger issue is Lothos.
I also think that he's in some ways, or maybe it was at some point, that he's like a dropout. Like that's the thing, is they're like approximately the same age, but like he just doesn't go to school. He dropped out. It's beyond them. He's not from there and came to there. It's something, I mean, again, this is an example of a script that like got taken from the writer, even though we know him to be very problematic now, and was just brutalized by everyone in between to kind of cobble together the story that they ended up telling.
Yeah. But the challenge isn't to say like, well, can a movie be made exactly as the screenplay? Because like no screenplay is going to survive even just the budget meetings completely unharmed. Like that's going to occur. The challenge is making a movie in spite of all of those hurdles that making a movie invokes, and making it work appropriately. Like if you've got a powerful star playing this like character who just kind of wants to ad lib stuff, you have to work with that. Like Whedon didn't want to work with any of this shit. Like that I think is a big problem there. Like he did not take people's ideas and try to incorporate them. He just said like, no, let's do it my way. And when they didn't, and Donald Sutherland could get away with that, like that's when you have like temper tantrums on set.
Well, and just that Sutherland would show up with all his own rewrites and not approve them with anyone. And the director was like, he's the biggest star, who cares? And it's like, your actor can't, but like the cramps thing was apparently Sutherland. All the like inherently like female issues were all Sutherland, like making her so demure and like womanly was all a lot of his work as well. And which all sounds like things now that Whedon actually would have probably put in his script after we've seen the travesty that was his writing for Black Widow. But like, you know, it's one of those things that like, it is still astonishing that we enjoy this movie, and you know, that it was enjoyable, but even, you know, yeah.
I mean, the cramp thing, I was like, really, it already sucks to be the Slayer. Like she's got to have cramps. Like that's the thing. Like you can give her spidey sense. Like you can't just make it tingle in the front of her head. It's got to be related to her womb.
Yeah.
That was very like, I
mean, also vampires are never exactly subtle ever. Like it's just, you can hear them coming. Like
yeah, not in this series, not in this movie.
But I mean, we are forgetting the shining star of this movie, who is Paul Reubens.
He is. He's the best part of this movie.
But also, I forget that this movie is kind of a who's who. We have a very young Hilary Swank. We have an uncredited Ben Affleck.
Yes, yeah, of course
as the basketball player. Ricky Lake was in this. I did not see her, but importantly, there is another tie to the Buffy series of exactly Seth Green, our baby little Seth Green as a vampire. But you also had like Alexis Arquette was the DJ. I mean, David Arquette's in the movie. Like it's one of those things that it's like, oh, this movie, it had some clout, though I had no idea who Candy Clark was, who played Buffy's mom, but she got like the literal top billing before everyone else in the credits. And I was like, am I supposed to know who she is?
That was a weird credit. I saw that this time and I was like, wait, what is that?
Well, I mean, she's most known, I think, for American Graffiti. She got an Oscar nomination for that, but like that was 20 years before this. But like, you know, so I guess she hadn't worked a ton after. But you know, it's funny.
It was just it's a weird credit in it because it's like the movie ends and it's then like Candy Clark is Buffy's mom, and then then the credits roll.
Well, and what's funny is also to think of this Well, something else we forgot to reference earlier is this is post Lost Boys. Lost Boys to me is tonally what this movie should have been, because there is still a great camp aspect to Lost Boys. But Case, I think you made a really good point that they're in many ways trying to explain the Slayer to us. And for me, the Slayer was the easiest thing to understand. But like, they were like, you got to invite me in, Pike, you got to invite me in. And it was like, oh, okay, we get that aspect of a vampire, I guess. But like everything else, they didn't build the parameters of the world.
Yeah, not at all. Although Paul Reubens did have a problem with high beam lights on a car. So apparently, lots of light, not happy about.
Yeah, it just would have been nice to like kind of go into, because like later on, like we get the nice callback to my keen fashion sense at the very end of the movie where she pulls up the cross and it's like your faith. And like at no point in this movie up until that spot have we discussed crosses. Have we discussed like what they can do with it, or if Lothos is particularly impressive by being able to set it on fire by sheer force of will. Now, I get that all of this is parody of existing vampire lore, but I'm just saying that in this movie, it would have been nice. You know, I'm going to keep talking about Blade because Blade is a really natural movie to like compare it to. In the first Blade movie, all you needed was that walk and talk where Blade's like, crosses doesn't do shit. Running water doesn't do shit. You need silver if you're going to like kill them. You know, he just like rattles off like the 5 major rules of like how you deal with a vampire. And it's like, that's all I needed. That was it.
And honestly, it would have been a lot less creepy than some of the training that happened.
Also, he wears that terrible tweed suit the whole time. I mean, we also, again, when we compare it now, we have to compare it to the series. And like, no one plays a watcher like Anthony Stewart Head. So like,
agreed.
You know, it's one of those things, but
Giles for life. Go on.
Also, because then when they let Giles get sexy in season 4 and you're like,
Rippa.
Oh, Rippa. Hello, sir. And there's like, you know, he has his lady friend who is also a watcher and he's all like shirtless in season 4 and he sings and it's like, I now understand why past Slayers have fallen for their watchers. But, you know, it is interesting that they, again, Marty Noxon, who would go on to do a ton of Buffy writing, pretty much leading the Buffy universe for Jaws on episodes he didn't write. They have these like books called Tales of the Slayers that people wrote, where it was like individual stories of past Slayers from their Watchers' journals. They bring Merrick back again for the Slayer who was born before Buffy, India. And they change his character quite a bit, but they still reference so much of like what he did in this movie as well, which it was one of those things that was like, well, they've obviously seen something that works. And so they're keeping these little bits of it through to keep the continuity of the universe. But that's, I think, my biggest issue with this movie, between the kind of the writing of the universe and the costumes of the universe, that it doesn't build the actual parameters of the universe for me in the way that the TV show did.
Right. And I don't need it all to be like world building. This is a standalone movie, like through and through. It's not intended to have sequels. It's just, you know, beyond just the implication that Buffy is now out there fighting vampires because awesome. You know, it's just that they aren't setting the rules for us to then work with those as like, that's part of the fun of like fighting the supernatural. Like they don't follow the rules of nature. They are like, that's why we say supernatural.
Supernatural, exactly.
Right. Like you can shoot a bear and it will die, but you can't just shoot a vampire and it will die because it's not a thing according to the rules of our existence. And that's why it's like is important sometimes to set up these rules, or at the very least like set some of the rules. And like, sure, the don't come in, which honestly was a thing I wasn't really familiar with before I got into Buffy stuff. Like I just didn't notice that in vampire lore. Like it's there. Like I never paid attention to it. And maybe because like so much of the stuff I had seen at that point was like Blade and like was like other stuff where they'd already like thrown that part out the window.
Interesting.
So when you get here, it would be nice to be like, all right, yeah, that crucifix matters. That, you know, the heart is the important spot. And we get the training scene where we emphasize that part. That's good. If it has to be wood or not, which is a thing in the series, but it isn't necessarily in this movie. Like it could be any sort of like thing going for the heart, you know, like it wasn't necessarily wood back in the day. What about beheading? What about fire? You know, like the fact that she's able to use the hairspray in conjunction with the flaming crucifix. Great scene.
Great moment.
Is fire a meaningful thing to use against a vampire? Like, are they able to mesmerize people? Clearly Lothos can, but we never actually talk about that part.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, one, I'm a little scared for your vampire knowledge. Yeah, you do have to invite them in. No welcome mats that say welcome.
No welcome mats. No welcome mats.
I'm just going to say that for anyone who's uneducated and their education's been ruined by Blade or whatever Case was watching. That's classic vampire lore, my friend. You have to invite them in. That's classic. Little worried for that. I tend to.
I'm sorry. I was introduced to vampires through the Count, and I thought that was the most important thing for a long time.
Listen, I want the listeners to know that I generally defer almost all like kind of knowledge to Case. I think that he's like an encyclopedia, a walking encyclopedia. And now I am questioning my entire existence and trust within his knowledge. I will be examining this and processing it. But I will say that I think that you're right on a lot of levels, that this movie kind of like just falls back on like, oh, well, people should know, right? Like, because in the training sequence, there's a moment where she like goes for his head and he's like, no, the heart. And like, that's basically one of the rules. But because it's done in the midst of a like music montage, which is great. Don't get me wrong. I love all the flipping and all the kicking. I wouldn't change that for the world. But maybe, maybe have some of the rules more defined in the midst of that. You can still cut it into all the kicking and flipping. Maybe you don't have to have a Blade like Sorkin walkthrough. Follow me, let me go through all the rules kind of thing. But you can have him going through it like, no, not like this, like that, and like kind of, chalkboard out the rules. So I do agree with you on that, but it does rely on stuff that is kind of just classic vampire stuff. Not edited, not new age 90s, like very, very classic old school vampire stuff. The only thing we never talked about was garlic, which, I mean, yeah, but everything else in there was really classic. I mean, when they pulled that across, I was like, of course they did.
Well, my point is just that like vampire film, especially vampire film of the back half of the 20th century, every single one tries to differentiate itself from other vampire media by saying they're different in X ways. So while this movie is kind of deliberately saying like, no, we're not going to worry about any of that, that would also have been fine, too, just to be like literally everything you've heard about vampires is true. And just like establish that like all that vampire lore is also fine. I mean, honestly, it doesn't break the movie for me. It just would have been nice.
They also could have alternatively, they could have done it with her explaining it to Pike. Honestly, like at some point, he's like, well, it's all real, right? Well, actually, this is real, but this isn't real, but it's cool. Anyway, and kind of done like that for a couple of
that would have been a really cool scene. You could have had her like kind of Valley Girl out like the explanation of like vampire stuff. And that would have been like nice and different from other vampire lore.
Yeah. And that whole thing about garlic, totally false. But anyway, what do you think of this nail color? I think it's really great and it really hides the blood. So all good.
Well, and even it's the one aspect that the show always focused on, that her training was equally physical as well as like intellectual. So like I would have loved to seen her in one of those series that like in one of those moments that like he takes the stake out and then like piles her arms full of like really giant tomes of ancient texts. And so like Pike finds her one day, she's literally sitting in the park, like leafing through this giant biblical text with a silver cross or something on the front of it. Just those little things that would have been like, oh, so it's because to me it just says, oh, she just got to be a bad bitch. She just got to be able to fight, and that solves the day. But there's so much to like understanding who the other girls, especially in this world, because I understand for like probably staffing reasons that like she always played the other Slayers. In the past, they just threw wigs on her and gave it the stupid fucking mole. That's the other thing. I was like, really, a birthmark? Okay. But, it's...
How else will we know? Not from the abilities.
Right. Well, then also in the series, it gets a little muddy when they're like, yeah, there's a giant book with a magical map that shows us where every potential Slayer is. And I was like, what? I'm sorry.
That's a plot convenience of later, and I don't think is too germane to this.
No, but I mean, then they blow up the Watchers Council, so that book goes bye-bye, and so they have to hand find all the potentials. But yeah, it's still one of those things that like There were just those little moments they could have, and for all we know, they did, and it was cut from the film. Just because Pike suddenly understands how to like slay a vampire in those moments, but it's also like there was still that focus for his character of, even though this is the damsel who is always in distress but can save herself, still needs someone to save her on occasion, or have like, it sets up that idea that we would deliver on in the series of the Scoobies, that like the Slayer is only as strong as the team that is supporting her. And
she needs a support system.
Well, and we've seen that like in the later series that like the 70s Slayer, which is Robin Hood's mother with Billy Idol Spike, she had no one, and her watcher was killed. So like she had no one. So, it's the Slayer can only do what they can be supported to do. It's that we need to support women, even demon slaying women, always support women.
Especially demon slaying women.
Especially demon slaying women, because there's a lot of demons to slay currently.
Yeah. Why don't we talk about the cast a little bit more specifically? We haven't actually talked about Buffy.
We have not. Yeah.
And this seems like a good time to bring up like Kristy.
Does it? Go on.
Kristy Swanson has some complicated politics these days that make me angry, but I really like her in this movie. Like, I feel like her going like weird, crazy, hard right these days. Like, it's the same reason. Like, I still like Dean Cain as Superman, even though he would go like off the deep end later in life. Like, it's kind of just in the same scenario of like, I feel like they never really thought about things, and then they found that they got positive feedback when they said shitty stuff, and it just has compounded as they've gotten older, and their careers frankly have kind of stagnated. But at this era, I think she's great. I think in terms of like this is gonna be the most controversial thing I'm going to say on this whole podcast, which is that I think in terms of the general thesis of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is that we are taking the stereotype of this like cheerleader type character, like the last girl type situation where, or maybe not even the last girl so much, the first girl type situation where it's, you're going to punish her for being vain and like and ditzy and like boy crazy and so forth. And then it turns out that she can actually kill the vampires that like come after her. Like, I think in terms of that idea, the fact that it's called Buffy the Vampire Slayer to generate that sort of irony right there, I think Kristy Swanson does a better job than Sarah Michelle Gellar for being that character. I think that Sarah Michelle Gellar, like, I love Sarah Michelle Gellar so much. Like, I love the character of Buffy in the show, but she's already gone through that whole transformation process. And like the season 1 stuff where she tries to be a cheerleader feels wrong. Like, it doesn't feel like Sarah Michelle Gellar just doesn't feel like that kind of like ditzy cheerleader. And Kristy Swanson, I think, nails it.
I mean, you can argue though that like, and I'm just going to push back on this because I think you're wrong. But you can argue that where Sarah Michelle Gellar starts, since thematically she's technically gone through what Kristy Swanson went through, she can't just pick up and be a cheerleader again because she knows too much now.
Oh, I agree. Like, Sarah Michelle Gellar is the better Buffy for the show. It's just that in terms of what this movie is and what that original idea, like, I don't think Sarah Michelle Gellar you could have put in this movie and had her do as good a job in this part.
Well, I also would posit that they introduced Cordelia to span the gap between who Buffy was and who Buffy became.
Yeah.
But also in the show, they allude that Pike is killed by a vampire mid-summer. Like, after this, that there are still more vampires and Pike dies. And so she has lost everyone at some point in the show, because she's like, I've lost several people that are very close to me from like the LA part of it. But when she's talking to Willow, season 1, and like her apprehension to getting close to Giles. So it kind of makes sense that she, obviously the girls also don't give a shit about her anymore, those 3 girls. So it's one of those things that it's like, I accept and say yes to both of your explanations. I'm going to be Switzerland here, just because that it's also the changes that had to happen to Buffy between the show. It's also a 5-year gap, and we go from a Valley Girl place to like a Melrose place, kind of like, so like something in between, like media evolved in storytelling. So taking it from a camp film that was supposed to be a comedy to a dark series, that it is billed firstly as a dark series and then secondly as a comedy. That I think both of those things are correct, that like Sarah could not do necessarily what they're accomplishing in this, but I think it's also because Sarah understood the long game of the character, at least to like the end of each season.
Yeah, again, I really am not trying to say that Sarah Michelle Gellar is the worst Buffy. I'm just saying that the idea of Buffy in this movie is not one that I think you would cast Sarah Michelle Gellar for.
I disagree with that, but I also want to say that I'm not knocking Kristy Swanson like as Buffy. I think that she did a good job. I just think that it's not fair to be like, well, Sarah couldn't do this only because I feel like Sarah's assignment wasn't this. And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that you can't compare the journey that Sarah had as Buffy because she already came into knowing like all this backstory and knowing that she was in a different place. Buffy's in a different place when we see her season 1. I
will also posit that her Daphne Blake in Scooby-Doo is very much this Buffy.
Okay, that's fair. Like I'm not trying to make too hard of a stance on this one.
Do you guys hear that? Case hates Sarah Michelle Gellar. He hates it.
And he loves Kristy Swanson.
He loves Republican Kristy Swanson. I'm sorry to Case.
Anyone who knew me in high school is going to be like, what the fuck is he talking about? Because he has such a crush on Sarah Michelle Gellar in high school.
I mean, like, I still have a crush on Sarah Michelle Gellar, and I'm not even into women. Like, I get it. I totally get it.
No, I understand what you're saying, Case, though, because I do think that there is, like, especially because the fandom is so in general, especially because Joss hated this film so much. There was a lot of hate and dislike thrown at this film and like, oh, it's not like it's not the real Buffy, like the show's the real Buffy. And so I can kind of understand you saying like, oh, like, no, actually, this is like her performance for this film was exactly what it needed to be. And that is true. What Kristy Swanson did in this film is exactly what Buffy needed to be for this film. And that is completely a valid take. I was just fighting back on like Sarah couldn't step into that too, because I think she could. But I just think that,
I'm just going to say that Sarah Michelle Gellar was initially reading for Cordelia, and like there's a reason for that. Like there's like a little, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not trying to be that harsh on this one. I'm just trying to say that like I like the take of Buffy in this movie because that is the original idea of like, all right, well, like, oh, isn't it funny? The person who you imagine to be the first victim of the vampire turns around and kicks the vampire's ass. Like that's like the elevator pitch for this movie. And I think she does a great job in that. And they do it, you know, the TV show kind of ups the super strength aspect of the Slayer. This one, there's certainly some of that, but like a lot more of it is like gymnastics and just like agility in the combat, which I think is more difficult with the fight choreography of a TV show because you just can't do the type of camera work and you can't spend the you know, days and days and days rehearsing a fight type that you would for a movie.
I think the show kind of amps up the power of the vampires too, though. Like the vampires in this one are easier to kill. Yeah. Like in general, like, you know.
Yeah, you can punch them and they'll respond.
Yeah, Luke Perry has no training. He just goes out there and just starts sticking them in the heart.
But the show does take away their flying ability.
Thank God. Oh my God. Especially because you could tell that like they could not stabilize those wires for any way, shape, or form. But like, you know, I love tweaked out vampire David Arquette. Also, apparently all vampires are the Joker. Like there's just this very much like, we're coming to get you, Batman, about every single vampire. And
come outside.
Yeah, well, and it's even like the bookish girl becomes the slutty girl because she still has that stupid yellow jacket on. Also, Hilary Swank trying to give us like Shakespeare in this, and she's fallen a little short, but it's like she's trying so hard of all these girls.
Her best moment was when she got knocked out and she crossed her eyes. It was amazing.
Yeah. Well, and then when she comes back and she's just babbling later, and you're like, oh, okay, she's never recovering from this.
Let's talk for a minute about Luke Perry, just because like I really like I like Pike a lot in this. Like he gives me Trent from Daria vibes up until the very end when he like shaves his sideburns down.
Well, yeah, like even with the little black soul patch, like
like that is the one character where I'm like, oh yeah, that's perfectly a 90s like stoner slacker type character. I do wonder if they were like, no, we can't have him like smoking drugs. Like he'll have a flask. He'll be an alcoholic instead was the compromise there, because that was definitely stoner vibes.
I'm shocked that he wasn't smoking. Like, I mean, this was also the point that like the anti-tobacco thing had started in films. And so like, but it would make sense that like those guys were like yelling at the girls for being loud in the movie theater, but they would be smoking in the movie theater, like those kinds of things. That it's like also somehow, how are those two guys not the most like loud and disruptive in the movie theater. It's the Four Valley Girls that are.
I mean, honestly, I kind of get it.
I mean, yeah. We're going to think.
I actually love that David Arquette's like character was like, we paid good money. And Luke Perry was like, we didn't. We did not pay any money. Like, it was great. It was a great moment.
Yeah. I mean, they understood. The two of them obviously understood the assignment. Their characters aren't as much of a reach by any means. They're, this movie is very archetypal of the time in many ways. But like, they're both so much fun. David Arquette always really commits. I enjoy him in film because he doesn't do much, but what he does pretty well. Like, it's the thing that he does. But like, Luke Perry's so lovable in this that like it made sense why he was the choice to get brought back as like Archie's dad in Riverdale, or like why he's so iconically remembered now. But also like, I understand why like a brunette chaos twink. Like, I get it, because like Pike's a brunette chaos twink at the end of the day. Like, I get it. Like, he's so handsome. I'm a big stan of Pike, but it's obvious that like Xander was supposed to fill some sort of Pike-sized hole.
Yeah.
Like they were looking for like the nerdy, not as attractive version as Pike, which Nicholas Brendon, very handsome in different ways. But, it's one of those things that they were trying to fill a hole in some way, shape, or form, and that like Angel is a big, like buffed up, like inflate him with a little helium, and Angel's Pike with muscles. But
Angel is like Pike in Act 3, and
yes.
And Xander is Pike in Act 1 and 2.
Oh yeah, pretty much.
It's actually like a little too perfect right there.
But like he and James Marsters are very similar body type wise. So like when Spike is introduced, it's like I see where they're still trying to like churn this idea of this character for him. But I thought he also had a really nice fit. I really liked that he was very not predatory when it came to Buffy, in the way that like when she's like, you can stay at the house, I didn't feel like he was like, he legitimately was going to sleep downstairs or in the guest room and like not be a fucking creep. And like, there's something, his eyes are this big, like they're giant. He has really good facial symmetry and had good hair for the time. So it was one of those things that like, he looked unassuming. He looked not dangerous after being like the dangerous guy.
And I like his like coming awareness of everything. At first he's, at first it's just like when he's confronted with Benny being like, wait, like, are you on something? And then they're like, I'm on nothing. And they cut to him floating and whatnot. And him just sort of like backing away from the whole situation to like coming to understand that there are vampires and first wanting to flee. And then once he sort of starts to understand the rules of it all, that all of a sudden gives him like the desire to work within those to actually like fight them. Like once he's like clear that that it's not just something spooky, that it's like literally vampires, that's when he starts actually like making the tools for it all and having a moral obligation. Whereas before that, he wanted to flee. He tells everyone that they like, he tells his boss at the auto shop he works on, like, you should get out of town too, because like something's weird. Like, I don't know what exactly, but something's weird. And I like that arc for him, like going from being like a completely like shiftless layabout who like throws the pocket change he has to see if they can get a hot dog to split, which is such an interesting scene right there.
Yeah.
That's the Ricky Lake scene, right? Like that.
She's the waitress. She's the waitress.
Yeah.
And it's like 2 cups of coffee or a hot dog. And it's just like, yeah, we'll take the hot dog. I'll have the bunny. The hot dog. How much of a shame that we didn't get Buffy actually cutting the dog up? Like they just like, you get the sound and the react, and then he's got it like slashed open. And I'm guessing that was just a hard shot to get right.
Oh, but, probably.
Yeah.
Well, and it's a very fun like Buffy statement of she's like, pull out your dick and I'm going to cut it off.
Yeah.
Because he's obviously very like enraptured with her from early on, but like I also really appreciate that she's not a great person like when we first meet her, but I also like that she's not the most vapid of the girls. Like she's not immediately a Cordelia, but also that like they're the popular girls, but like not many people like clearly like them. But
yeah, they're ruling with the iron fist, if they're ruling at all. They're just very cliquey. Like they're not. It doesn't seem like people really like enjoy them at all. I have to say too, like one of my favorite interactions in the movie, which is probably the best part of the movie for me as a girl, is when Luke Perry and Kristy Swanson, or Buffy and Pike, are dancing. He says to her, "You're not like other girls," and she goes, "No, I am." And like that, there's like a like lovely like reaffirming like all girls are kind of special. No, I'm exactly like other girls. There's a very like strong, you know, supporting other women in that line. It is destroyed moments later in another scene with Lothos where he says, "You're not like the others." And she said, "Maybe I'm not." And I'm like, no, that's the opposite of what I wanted to hear. But it is a really nice moment. And it's like this moment where like she's with Pike and she's like able to just kind of be herself. And Buffy has these moments in the script that are very like lovely and really like her character's lovely and complex. So she's not she's not totally good, she's not totally bad, but she accepts her responsibility eventually. So it does have growth for her, and that's lovely.
Could not have put that better, Sam.
Yeah, Sam, thank you for mentioning that one, because I do like that part, because it is nice that we get a rebuttal to that classic "you're not like the other girls" trope, and it's cool to do that here, where like she's literally not, in the sense that she is like she's the Slayer, but like the point is that like anyone can engage in these things appropriately if they like take the steps to do so. And I think that's sort of why it's like nice that like the Slayer's power level is like a little bit lower than in the show. You know, again, like it's really only that she sort of has like a natural gift for all the vampire slaying stuff, but it's not like anything that she does is outside of the realm of what a human could do.
Yeah, it's like she's got like extra agility because she can catch the knife. Like, so she's got this ability, right? Because Merrick throws a knife at her head and she catches it. So she's got speed and agility and kind of faster reflexes, but she's not, show Buffy who's like throwing vampires through a wall.
Right. Yeah. So it's nice that we do get that element of like, no, like all girls contain multitudes and they can all be whatever they want to be sort of element there, which is, that part's good. I did like that rebuttal there. And like, I like their relationship because she can be the strong one in the relationship, but still want to be feminine. Yeah.
Cause he actually, just before they start dancing, he asks if he can take the lead. And she said, no, he said, I bet you're going to want to lead. And she goes, no, so it's like, yeah, like I am stronger than you. I am the Slayer, but no, we can still do this. You can still take the lead. Like, I want you to take the lead. I thought it was kind of nice. She does also tell him to stay, though, when the vampires come. Right. She's like, no, you stay here. I got to go take care of this. Don't piss me off.
Well, so actually, like rewatching that scene last night, it was the dance part. He's like, I bet you want to lead. And then he doesn't want to lead either. And it sort of ends up where the two of them are just equals. And that part I thought was like kind of a nice element of this all, where, it is kind of saying that like some of the, like you can take the gender roles that you want, like enjoy the gender stuff that you care about and that you appreciate, but like you don't need to be confined to it.
Because even despite being like a harder dude, like he's still a polar opposite from like the very masculine like bros that like Buffy's, well, especially the guy that clearly in any other movie would have been the werewolf, not the vampire.
Sasha Jensen, who plays Grueller.
Yeah, Grueller. Yeah.
I want to talk about him next, actually. So.
He's literally like, which is also like very reminiscent of like when they did Beer Bad in season 4. Like it's these little moments that like would be a little bit referential. No, I do have a weird question for you all. Do you like that this had a happy ending and ends on a high note?
As opposed to the original script where it all gets burned down.
Yep. And like Merrick kills himself and doesn't die at the hand of Lothor.
I like that it had a happy ending because it feeds into the camp. Like I want to see them go off. Like a different movie where it's a little darker and where it can get crazy and the shit can hit the fan and it's going like full cult classic, like let the bodies hit the floor. Fine. Yeah, you can do that. But I think to keep it comedy, to keep it light, to keep it, to have the best death scene ever committed to cinematic history. I think the happy ending fits that. And honestly, that's the only scene in this movie that actually matters. I know you guys, we've mentioned a lot of other stuff, but Paul Reubens' death is the only one that matters. And in order to keep that consistent, I think you need to have a happy ending. I think you do. I think that it's fine. I mean, could you have had more losses? Sure. But it's a first movie. And I think that it's fine to have her kind of be triumphant here. So you already have a loss. Merrick at least died, right? So it's not like there were zero costs to this. The principal giving detention to everyone, like all the people who came back who were technically seniors and vampires on the floor that had been staked, but he's going around just giving them detention. Hilarious. Loved it. Keep it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a lot to say about Stephen Root as the principal, but like beyond just that, he's nice comic relief there. And like Stephen Root, who's just comedy legend Stephen Root is in this movie as this like minor principal just handing out detention slips to vampires. It's amazing.
It's great.
I mean, it's great, like, so I think like in the spirit of that, like where does Paul's death, where does Stephen's principle fit in a story where everything gets burnt down and suicide happens at the end?
Like, I think as a standalone movie, this needed to have the happy ending for the type of story that they're kind of doing here. If this was a soft pilot to a TV show, the fire burning it down, I think, works really well to set up the ostracized Buffy going into it. Like they did do the comic Buffy, the Origin or Origins or whatever it was called, where they like basically just take the screenplay as Whedon wrote it and adapted it to a comic. And like all those elements that they reference in the show that like we never saw in the movie, those are there, like the Merrick suicide, the everything getting burned down, etc. So, it's fine if you know that it's going somewhere else. But if this was just going to be a movie about a valley girl who's able to beat up vampires, despite what the audience is going to expect of the valley girl, I think the happy ending it works really well here.
I completely agree with you all. Like 1000%. I think for this movie, the happy ending is sweet and it's kind of what we want. It's so referential to a John Hughes movie. It is referential of the movies that were produced in the years just before this. Like it is,
yeah.
It feels like, because like in a world where like Heathers exists at this point already, it's one of those things that it seems to be tying up the end of this is the vestiges of that era, and we're moving into the mid 90s into a different kind of storytelling for stories. So I think it seems appropriate to have a happy ending with this story.
You just mentioned two things that I wasn't sure how I was going to work into my notes, which was the John Hughes stuff and also Heathers. So like,
well, I mean, Heathers is, in any other story, you could make JD a vampire and it's Buffy. Frankly, it would be if Spike came before anybody else to find Buffy. Spike shows up ahead of time, and that's Veronica as Buffy's. It feels very much, I mean, he fucking dies at the end because JD deserves to die because JD's a fucking psychopath. But also, like, every teen love story or every teen movie since Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink and Weird Science is always going to reference and trope off of a John Hughes movie. Like he truly defined the new like teen picture. And
well, look at the Letterman jackets they're all wearing. It's the same one that Emilio Estevez wears.
Absolutely. Like, it's where we started using visual signifiers to do archetypal troping for a lot of characters. But it's also because, like, The Breakfast Club is iconic and it is a fantastic movie. Pretty in Pink is a fantastic movie. But it's also why John Hughes, like, even going into, like, making the Home Alone movies, like the next year, Home Alone 2 would be released. Home Alone 1 has already come out. Like, it's one of those things, like, he had a beautiful way of storytelling and understanding kind of the demographic of who he was working with, and it just worked. And so, like, everyone references John Hughes, whether they intentionally reference John Hughes, because, he took what wasn't working out of the, like, beach movies from the 60s to kind of reformat into like what made a good teen movie that everyone would watch. I'm sure he wasn't going, well, they'll still be watching it 40 years later, just because home video was not a huge thing yet. But like, it's one of those things that this is so self-referential, and like that, the dance moment, it feels just like a great John Hughes moment. Because also at times there are moments where I feel like Kristy Swanson was probably given like Molly Ringwald as a point reference in many ways, that like there are many of her acting choices, but also because she was just younger than Molly Ringwald and was in she was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. She was in Pretty in Pink. She was in those movies going up and through. Those were her first roles in like tiny things. So those were the actresses she was watching. works in those ways. And so it makes sense that this would be really referential to that.
Well, and her through line with her boyfriend is very similar to any through line with any of those teen movies. And in fact, her kind of through line going through his friend group, which we can circle back to, and then finding Pike, this example of like this very like toxic, unhealthy relationship, which was very like sexually charged and very like, not that sex is bad, but very sexually charged and kind of like not a lot of conversation happening between her and her boyfriend, and her boyfriend's friend Andy constantly like hitting on her, even though her boyfriend's right there.
Well, it's not that it's sexually charged. It's that she's objectified. She's an object to be prized over. Like when she flips what was that Andy that she flips in the hallway that time? And then it's like, hey, don't touch my thing or I'll pop you one. Like, it's like him still having to like have this like broy
Control.
Alpha male. Yeah.
He has control over her. Even when she comes out of the mall, like in the very beginning after the movie, and she jumps over in the car and she goes to like kiss him, and Andy's like staring at her butt, and he says out loud, "Can I borrow her?" And he said, "No, you're just going to get her dirty."
Right. It's
not like don't talk about my girlfriend that way. Like that's disrespectful. Like it's just kind of like, no, bro, you'll get it dirty. Like you're gross, and I don't want the thing I use to be gross.
Yeah, really weird for Randall Battenkoff. I only know from this and then from the TV show Kristy, where he plays a reverend.
Well, he was also in one of my favorite TV shows of all time, A Different World. After Debbie Allen took over for Bill Cosby, he played Kim Rhodes's white cousin who shows up at the historically black university, and is like the one white face in the room for a lot of situations.
Well, after Marissa Tomei leaves.
After Marissa Tomei leaves. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, not cousin of Kim Rhodes, cousin of Cree Summers' character, Freddie.
Yeah, I mean, he's done a lot of stuff. I just like... I binged Kristy as an adult, and then like we were watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This was like 15 years ago. Watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it's like, oh wait, that's the same fucking guy, and that's so weird.
I have not thought about Kristy in years.
Well, and this is where we get like this whole movie, and I like is such a weird spot because like you mentioned that like Kristy Swanson had done like John Hughes movies before it. Like, so Kristy like was led by Kelly Martin, who was the voice of Daphne and a bunch of Scooby-Doo stuff, and is often mistaken for Sarah Michelle Gellar. And then Sarah Michelle Gellar plays Daphne in a bunch of Scooby-Doo stuff. So like all these like parts and whatnot are just like all interchangeable with each other. I mentioned that I wanted to briefly touch on Sasha Jensen as Grueller, who is like the first jock that disappears, and you don't actually see him die. You just see like Paul Reubens comes around, and you're like, oh, he's gonna die, because like we as the audience know he's gonna die, and then he shows up again for the basketball scene with Ben Affleck, which is that Sasha Grueller is like, I don't know what he's been doing more recently, but in the 90s he was in a bunch of teen stuff, and the next year he was in Dazed and Confused. He's one of the like I think he's Benny in Dazed and Confused. Or I'm blanking on the names at the moment, but like he's like, which is a movie I love, but that's one of the definitive 90s like teen comedies, kind of the American Graffiti of the 90s in a lot of ways, actually. A lot of ways. So like this whole world of like random like people are just like, again, this movie was just like right on this like weird spot between like 80s material and 90s material, and you can kind of see the bleed over. I just wanted to mention that part because I love Dazed and Confused. I joked with Mitch Payek that we should start a show called Linklateurs, where we just discuss the works of Richard Linklater. And I said, we're not going to do it. It's a terrible idea, but I'm going to, and I typed out the pun, and I was like, say it out loud and then giggle, and then we're not going to do anything with it. So
I mean, he also starred as Teen Angel in the Disney show Teen Angel. It was part of the all-new Mickey Mouse Club block because he was one of the Mickey Mouse Club kids. So, and he was in Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers.
One of the many returns of Michael Myers.
One of the ones that because I just finished watching all of the Halloween films up to the one that just came out, and I was like, Halloween 4 and Halloween 5, they are something. They are something. Ooh, but he's so good, and really he kind of commands that scene. Again, he has a very werewolf like Neanderthal quality to him, but he was so,
that scene felt a lot like Teen Wolf.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. But it was also one of those moments where it's like, does no one see that he looks different? Does no one understand? Does no one understand that something is happening?
Well, the ref says something about it.
I think they do, but I think no one wants to go and do it because it's actually kind of funny because the ref goes to the coach and it's like, he can't do that. You need to remove him. And then the coach turns around to his bench and he's just like, does someone want to go over there and tell him he has to leave? So I think everyone knows that something's wrong, but they're afraid.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Also, can we talk about the coach for a second? Being the
the worst,
the weirdest granola
teacher,
level,
in a terrible suit. Yeah, it's stupid, but God, it's funny.
He has. At one point, he's got a play plan, and he has it upside down, and he's like, "Okay, so you see it." And he's like, "Actually, someone says actually where the squares," and he's like, "Oh, right," and he turns it onto the other side, so he had it upside down.
And one time it just says peace and love and has an infinity symbol. And it's like, oh, I get it. Okay. It's a commentary on California educators at the time. We get it. Okay. This is funny. I mean, the nice thing is kind of everybody in this, whether it all melds together well, they kind of get what they were trying to do. And for a movie that was made in like 4.5 weeks, I think it works for me. Like, it's one of those things that it's not awful. And I had so much fun rewatching this, and I don't always remember having fun watching this, but like this time I really I put down my Switch and I was like, oh no, I'm actually really enjoying this film.
Yeah, like the movie works really well divorced from the TV show. Like if you really separate that, I think you've got a pretty solid just like romp about this all. And like I said, I think it just came out at the wrong time. It had like a little bit of the wrong aesthetic for when it came out. And, it's like not everyone is in the same movie. Like we talked about Lothos a bit. Let's talk about we haven't really talked about Pee Wee Herman.
Except all I've done is talk about him. And
I know
I've been barred every moment.
I honestly would argue that Paul Reubens should have played Lothos. Like, honestly, a Paul Reubens chaotic Lothos would have been chef's kiss.
I agree with you, but also the fact that he's like Lothos' personal assistant
the
and
acolyte.
Completely frustrated with him all of the time is so funny to me that every time he's just like, but sir, I don't think we should. Fine. Like he just kind of like, it's just like this very frustrated personal assistant. And I kind of love it.
It's also like he brings masterful performance to whatever he does. Like there's so much to him outside of Pee-wee and so many people don't know that, but like, it's so good. He is chef's kiss. I kind of wish he could have gotten his friend Cassandra Peterson in this, like, because they always do stuff together a lot because they were in Groundlings together. And I would have loved to seen a Cassandra Peterson, like vampire queen appearance in this as well. But like, he's so good. And I think he's what keeps the movie propelling forward in a way that if it wasn't someone who was having so much fun, because he's giving new meaning to chewing the fuck out of the scenery. Like,
I agree with you. One of the best scenes that Rutger Hauer is in is the scene where he's yelling at Pee-wee's character for losing his arm to a mere human because he's just like, you've been alive, and I forget the number. He's like, but you've been alive for 200 years and you're doing this, and he's just like, just kind of like sheepishly like, but at the end kind of just snarls at him. I was like, this is so cute. Like, I kind of wish there was more them arguing, like an odd couple living in that cave, going over things.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the movie. I don't forget about Buffy. I just want.
Well, and like Reubens, when he shows up, he is actually the one exception to what I was saying, which is that he is wearing leather. And we get that when his arm goes away or goes away, when his arm gets ripped off.
When his arm goes away
it just
on vacation and went to Maui.
And he like approaches and whatnot. And he's like, you ruined my new jacket. Kill him a lot. I like that line. That delivery's really good.
So good. I just so appreciate that line.
But he's also got the right look for the vampire in like.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, like there might be some issues with his wig and so forth, but like he actually is wearing a leather jacket. He looks like a 90s vampire in the right ways. When he rolls around on the carousel that first time and we see him and he like and he like grins with his like big fangs and whatnot. Like that's a perfect introduction. Like we as an audience are like, that's a vampire. We know how the scene's going to go. Like it was a perfect selling for how the vampires should have been across the board.
Yeah. And his scene also, when Luke Perry is trying to intervene as Kristy Swanson is being hypnotized by Lothos and Pee Wee Herman, I'm going to call him Paul, sorry. Paul steps in and he kind of like confronts Luke and he's like, do you remember me? And he says like, I do. And the way that he said it, I was like, oh, be careful. Like, I was just like, that's a scary vampire. Like, funny wig and all. That man is nature's way of saying don't touch. In fact, that wig should give it away.
Well, I actually think the wig is great for the character, especially because we see him in medieval period at one point as well. And he's just like dressed the same, except it's like a Shakespeare puff sleeve. And I was like, I'm not mad at this. I think this is perfect. Like I think there was obviously like such a good forethought with one character that just did not translate to the. No, I don't know if it was Rutger Hauer had a lot of say in what the character ended up looking like or something, but yeah, it's Paul Reubens got it. Now I'm going to posit one thing that I think is missing from this. Now I know you all said you like how the vampires die in this. I am partial to the dusting also because it's then like when the police show up, they were like, well, wait, what actually happened? Because then
there's just dead bodies everywhere.
Right. Well, and some of them have wooden stakes, but what I would have loved is like a post-credit scene where they go and find what's his name, Amelin's body, and they pull the stake out of him, and then he wakes up and goes, surprise. And like that's just the end of the movie. Great. Well, because it's one of those things, it's like, oh, because like it makes sense then, oh, we have to burn everything down because the vampires then their bodies have to be burned. It's even like the one thing they did in Twilight that I went, it all makes sense. Burn the bodies. Yeah. Because it is a demon. It's going to reanimate the body. Like it's one of those things that would have been great. Because again, this is like in the time where we're playing with like movies having sequels, it had been one of those things that was like, okay, what if literally you remove the stake? And that's why they have to do the like double push, the like hit and then the push it in. And then if it's removed, somehow it like they repair themselves or something. That would have just been fun. Also, because I was like, give me another movie with that character. Because I had the thought, because we've talked Batman with Two-Face and Joker or Riddler in it before. I was like, why has Paul Reubens never played the Riddler? Like, why? Agreed. I was going to say Joker, and then I was like, no. It takes a little more craft and cleverness to play the Riddler, and that seems
80s era Paul Reubens. Like made up like Pee Wee Herman, but with the suit being green with black question marks on it, or vice versa, would be just to die for.
Everything. It would be everything. Yeah, it would be.
You are preaching to a chorus. We are generally agreeing with everything you're saying.
Conductor lead.
Yes, we're in here with you. We're like, get my time machine.
Because in that situation, I know she didn't exist yet, but then I was like, give me Cassandra Peterson's like as Poison Ivy or something. Like, give me that Batman Rogues Gallery film. Who knew we would get to Buffy or Batman via Buffy? But Bats, it's there, it's fine. But I wish the prosthetic application had been a little better because I liked the weird teeth that make sure your mouth puff out a little, and then the ears.
I like the ears are great. I love those.
I really like the ears, and because it would be a thing where they would go full facial prosthetic for the TV show. But I even think like graying them out with the idea that like the body is dying. It's not super alive, but it's being kept together by this demon, which they mention in passing, I think is really interesting that they went, oh yeah, there's a demon. Anyway, which we would elaborate on way more in the TV show or other, different versions of what vampires actually are. But it is one of those things that like, for what they did, and again you can tell there was a limited production budget there because they made this movie with $7 million. Like in the long run, to do 4 weeks of shooting in LA for $7 million, like that seems crazy. Even though they only used 4 or 5 locations, ultimately, apparently.
There are a few times where they emphasize that it's LA with like the fake newscasts, and those are the spots where I'm like, yeah, it is LA. It's not just like Southern California, but like explicitly LA.
Well, and they shot in LA, like downtown LA but they don't get
because they only have so many locations that they use, like there are spots where it just doesn't like it just feels. It doesn't feel, you don't get some of like the LA baggage that would have been maybe kind of nice to play with, like vampires showing up in Hollywood.
Well, and that idea, like they didn't, the one last thing that I'll say they didn't really develop for us is the scale of the stakes. Pardon the pun. One, the stakes are so unwieldy and unmanageably large in this version of it, like the giant fucking door stopper stake. But no, like, it's like, great. This is so why hasn't Lothos literally taken over the world before? Are you saying that there are cities across the world that are all overrun by vampires because Lothos killed the Slayer in that timeline? Like, is the Slayer immediately going to be reborn? Like if this kind of thing is going back and forth, or what happens now that the Slayer is alive and Lothos is dead? I'm confused. Is he just going to be reborn and has to be turned back into a vampire? Confusion. But I think it's just those moments of like this. I would have liked, because even if this was a suburb of LA, understanding that they're, the 50 sprawling miles of suburbs of LA, what are the stakes of a true vampire, vampires overtaking LA? Because they even managed to do that in Angel quite often, to still give it an LA scope while dealing with like, a portal to hell's opening again. And they didn't have the aspects of the hellmouth yet, and like knowing LA is a hellmouth. But it's like, that's the one thing, is it's like, so she's probably never going to deal with this again, and she's never going to have to like fight vampires because they all gone. They're not going to come look for her anymore because Lothos is like siring them all. So it's like that idea. That's the thing I'm not understanding really with the story is
this kind of goes back to my rules thing. Like, this is the thing that, like, outside of like all the vampire lore of like, well, what things actually work on them, what is Lothos's deal, and what is the Watcher and the Slayer's deal specifically in this movie, which is introducing all three of these characters? Like, Lothos, like, is he trying to take over the world? Like, why does Merrick have these restrictions of like, if he steps in, like there's an issue? If he dies, is that issue then like the Slayer is left without guidance, and maybe he isn't reborn like if he intervenes, maybe he is not reborn in time for the next Slayer or something like that. Like, what is Lothos's deal? Why is he being like, it seems very much like the Master in season 1, where they're like empowering him at the start of this movie. So why does that work that way? Does the Slayer only work up to a certain point? Is the Slayer's death like related to it? Like Lothos is depowered, but like still alive or something like that. Like, it's how he maintains his eternal life or something. Like some cycle, like an Odin sleep type thing. Like, that's the exact question, where like, what is Lothos trying to do now versus in the Dark Ages?
Yeah, well, and it's also interesting because like Luke Perry's character actually, like, he does try to run away, and when he comes back and he's talking to Buffy, he says, well, I thought about running away, but then I realized it's everywhere. So like, there is a reference to this idea that like, this is not the only vampire enclave, that like there is no escape for this. So he might as well like take a stand and like fight here, like, live where he is. But again, like you said, there's no actual like rules for this universe, or what is happening, or what the stakes are, or why. Like, again, why would Lothos wait? Why does he hesitate to kill her? What, you have her in your thrall. She's there. Technically, Merrick should be no actual like real threat to you. Mm-hmm. He didn't seem like much of a threat. In fact, they seem to have a conversation. And when Donald Sutherland died, when Merrick dies, he says, play your game your way. Don't play our game. As if this is like an eternal dance between him and Lothos and the Slayer.
Right.
That just continues to happen over and over and over again. And I was like, is this Highlander? Mm-hmm. Like, is Buffy Highlander?
Well, but also, if you think about it, if he is always killing the Slayer, and the first lines of the film are into every generation, which would continue to be the mantra of the show. It's what introduced the first like half of season 1, was that like Giles narrating into every generation that there's a Slayer. She's born to fight the blah, 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 blah. But in theory, if he is constantly killing the Slayer through time, he's doing this every 18 years. Like, in theory, even if he has to wait 20 years for a Slayer to be born or whatever, but like technically, shouldn't then the Slayer be able to be like awoken into a family like that just conceived a child, so it's going to be born, so then literally it's going to happen again in 16 years, like 17 years. That
so Avatar,
literally Avatar. Yeah, literally, it's one of those things that I'm just going, I think it's another situation where it's like, oh no, the more we talk about it, we're going to start pulling a thread.
Right.
But I think it's because setting the parameters of your world is so important. And, again, I'm wondering if there are scenes that were cut of like Pike getting to LA and then being like having the shit knocked out of him by a vampire in like downtown LA while he's trying to leave. Like his van breaks down again or whatever. That's why he's like, it's everywhere. But it's also, it's everywhere. Does that just mean, is there evil everywhere? Like he's running away from something, but it is thematically always going to follow him, whether it's like the establishment or it's literal vampires or this, that, or the other.
Yeah. Who knows? The movie never told us.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. If we start pulling on these threads, it's going to unravel. So why don't we take a break, shout out some of the great shows on our network, and then when we come back, let's see if we can sew this thing back together.
Nostalgia is one of the strongest forces in the human psyche and is responsible for the continued existence of some of our favorite fandoms. From the minds behind the Dole Up in Dreams podcast and Isolation Cast Voices from Quarantine, Saturday Morning Confidential takes you on a deep dive into the properties that helped influence the artists and creators of today. So whether you are a Goonie, a Gem Girl, a Digi-Destined, or you just want to return to Oz, new episodes release on Fridays bi-weekly starting January 1st of 2021. And join us on the Wednesdays after the main show for the Serial Killer Radio Hour, where we sit down with the people responsible for the toys, shows, and fandoms that you love. Now you can find Saturday Morning Confidential at certainpov.com/SMC pod or on your favorite podcast platforms. So don't forget to tune in for another deep dive into the files of Saturday Morning Confidential.
And we're back. All right, guys. So we've all agreed that we generally like this movie, that there's like little pieces, and then there's the shadow of the show, which, it means a lot to all of us. It was a wonderful thing when it came out. It was a show I rewatched and revisited a ton in my 20s. But, that's its own product. So let's talk about this movie and how it could have been more successful, because it was critically panned. And the fact that it was so cheap is the only reason why it wasn't like a total bomb. But that's a pretty low bar right there. So, yeah, I'm not allowed to go first. So, Matty, you are the guest. Are you going to go first, or is Sam going to go first?
I think Sam can go first if she would like to.
Sure. I can go first. I realized that this has actually become a fun game of, is Sam going to have to go first? And I actually very much enjoy it. Every time it comes up and he says that, I'm like, what will the guest pick? Oh, no. Every time. So I really like this movie a lot. And this movie is actually the reason my family watched the show, because it was one of my mom's favorite movies. I know I've talked about my mom a lot on this podcast. She loves movies like this, and she loved this movie. And at the time, we did kind of like we would watch like TV as a family, and each family member could pick a show. And Buffy was my mom's show because of this movie, and that's why I ended up watching Buffy. Having said that, there are some things up front, I think, in the first half of the film that could be cleaned up a little, like in terms of the past lives and kind of making it a little more streamlined. Like, I'm doing this rewatch as a person who has watched 7 seasons of Buffy and has also seen this movie before. And so as we were talking, I was just like, I wonder how much of seeing that stuff I took for granted of knowledge that I already have. Because had I come into this with no knowledge, would I be able to follow it? Like, yes, it's Kristy Swanson's face. And so you kind of get that it is her in past lives. I don't think that's necessarily bad, especially because they don't give a lot of exposition. And the fact that she's having these dreams and she's living inside of those things, I think that's fine. But I think I would have liked that to be a little more fleshed out. And I would have liked, especially for Lothos's motivation and his connection to the Slayer, to be fleshed out. Whether that is, and I'm kind of angling towards wanting to kind of wait to the right moment that the Slayer, like maybe like a full moon, or I don't know, something in terms of that, where basically preying upon the Slayer or defeating the Slayer or drinking of her blood would make him more powerful. Kind of bring in some type of the occult. That way you can like correspond the dance with that night. You know, like the 23rd of May is the night that if you drink the Slayer's power, blood, you're imbued with like a crazy power. Because that gives me also like the whole like high school feeling that the John Hughes movie we're getting, right? Because there's a deadline. There's a deadline for the vampires. There's a deadline for Buffy, who's just trying to figure out how to hold it all together with her new responsibilities and extracurriculars, and still throw the perfect dance. And I think that's the thing that I would fix the most. And I would lean into the camp. I would just let it go camp. I would let her be up top a little more Valley Girl. Like, I think that she is, but I feel like they don't lean into it quite enough. Like, I want a little more of it. And I would just, have everyone be in the same movie, fix some of the costumes, and kind of, but I think that this movie is a treasure. I think that it's lovely, and I do miss the dusting, Maddie, but for the purposes of their lack of ability to have dusting, I say it's okay to let the bodies hit the floor. But let's do an end scene where the cops are really confused and the principal's trying to explain it. Because I love him, so let's throw him back into it and just be like, no, they're vandals. They came here. They were attacking people. This is self-defense. I've given them all detention. It's fine. You know, kind of have like that kind of moment. And then, maybe like Paul Reubens, I do want him to die and then come back to life, because I would like a sequel with him taking over, the very frustrated assistant taking over for Lothos and doing what he could not do and getting that gosh darn Slayer. That's my fix, because I love this movie.
I love that. I would also add, maybe give him Benny and the guy as his like bumbling assistants. Give me both of them.
Oh yeah, like, just maybe even have Pee Wee Herman kind of just be like, you can't get good help these days, you know, like a Bebop Rocksteady kind of thing.
That'd be so good. I would love that.
Now I'm just picturing, like, can you imagine if he at the end it like sets up the lair, but it's like a goth version of Pee Wee's Playhouse, and like
amazing.
He like strolls in like all Pee Wee style in his vampire attire, and like the chair like opens its mouth and it's like all big giant fangs. It'd
be amazing. Incredible.
Or I would love if he beheads Lothor and just keeps it in a box and just says, "Hi, Lothor." Or Lothos. I keep saying Lothor, but it's Lothos.
Yeah. God, I hate you.
That's great though. Like, because like we've all talked that like the bones of this is actually not the problem of the movie.
It's the details. It's the details, and it's mostly a lot of movies that fail for me personally are the movies that fail to really define the villain. When you have a very two-dimensional plastic, you know, kind of like villain without motivation, and it's just very hard to get motivated to like the stakes go nowhere, you know, like it's so because Lothos kind of lives in this weird cartoony caricature of Dracula, like seductive Dracula, but without any kind of real fangs. Oh my God. Without any real teeth and without any real objective other than like, let's play a violin seductively during a high school party. I don't get it. It's all very funny, but it's not, that would take the movie to another level, I think.
I agree. Mine is very similar, where why only give us 30 seconds of the past? Like, every time they have an opportunity, every time she goes to sleep, because they put her in bed several times. Like, they take us to the end of Buffy's day. We watch her get into bed. So they lose these opportunities. So honestly, for me, I would start at the top and give us about 5 to 10 minutes of that, like the original, but like, go back to a Celt story, go back to an early Romanian story and make both Merrick and Lothos brothers, and have some sort of clericness about them, have some sort of tie to spirituality, religion, and have the Slayer girl either be an assistant. She is a niece. She is somehow familially. And then there's something where they are all then tied to this magical, spiritual, literally circle of time, like wheel of time moment, and give us those. No, I'm glad, because at one point Merrick goes, and the slave girl, and I go, I'm glad we didn't see that one.
Yeah.
I mean, I know
in Virginia, they were like very clear, like, oh, we're talking about American
very
slave.
clearly. And I went, oh no, thank goodness we didn't get that. But maybe it got shot and they panned it, because thank the Lord. But it's those things.
Yeah, good illusion to drop. Not a thing I need to see.
And also, again, I don't mind keeping Kristy Swanson as the Slayer every time, and keeping Donald Sutherland as the Watcher every time. But I think I agree that, like, give us a blood moon, give us something that Lothos is working towards to give us the scope, and like why they need to turn as many teenagers into vampires as they can. Like, there is a thing that they're just kind of doing it to do it, but like, what, like, is it a blood moon? I just watched Turning Red, so like blood moon is on my mind. But yeah, like, is it like a blood moon? Is there some supernatural eclipse, something? Well, like, even in like an eclipse where there are going to be hours of daylight that are blocked out by the sun, and so and then we see this really ridiculous looking Lothos the whole time, and then he arises and is an actual like legend style demon. Like vampire, like, so we see like the ancientness of him, because I know he says Amelin is 1,200 years old at one point. They've lived, a literal millennia. Like, there is a thing about that for those. And so I'm guessing that Lothos is older. So like, if we are taking it back to a like dawn of time, that's why it made sense in the show for it to be a literal like African girl from the Fertile Crescent was the first Slayer. Like, though that made so much sense that it's like, or referencing how the Slayer became the Slayer, those things, and that's what ties them together. Or like, is the demon that is in Lothos the same demon that is given the Slayer her ability? Like, that moment to make them, again, I hate referencing Harry Potter, but like, is it the phoenix feather, the two phoenix feathers from the same phoenix is the thing that ties them, and why they have to be in this struggle? But it's because those, otherwise the camp is there for me. I think I would love it. I still would argue that burning it down would be really funny, to have the president, the principal then being like, you see what had happened was, and so with no bodies there, they all sound fucking crazy. And so he's literally on like the LA News, the LA News, explaining that there were like vampire monster beings and they had to like destroy them, and students died, and so just kind of watching him unravel. But I think if they had just kind of put that actor in front of the camera and said, go, it could have been so good, because he's such a prolific comedian. So they're just those little things that I would have tweaked. I also willingly would have set up a sequel, because this is a world that, like, even without the TV show, this is a really interesting world to me. I think it's interesting to then set up the structure of, there's always, in any sort of vampire lore, the more we learn about the different classes of vampires and kind of the different thing, we learn there's a hierarchy, and there's older vampires, there's newer vampires in these things. And like, what does it mean if Lothos is no longer in play? What does that mean? Are there werewolves in LA? Like, is that, is there a thing? Buffy goes to New York for college and she finds vampires there, and then Amelin shows up. Like, it's one of those things that it's like, oh fuck, this is a world where like just little tweaks to the script would have been really, really nice. I also would have taken out all of the cramps, all of the like, use your womanness as a thing. And I would have made Merrick less creepy. I would have also made him younger. I think I understand it's the same thing as when you pull the classic Van Helsing into Dracula stories and having him be a 60-year-old man that's kind of shambling around to be a vampire hunter. I don't enjoy those stories because I think it somehow castrates the character. So I would have liked to see, not to be ageist, but like seen that like Merrick also, maybe Merrick, because he's also magic, does not age the same way that everyone else does because he's being reborn. Or maybe Merrick just hits this point and this is the first time Merrick is dying. Like it's a thing where like Merrick and Lothos both have to die in order for the cycle to stop. But just because that cycle stops does not mean that it's stopping the cycle of all evil. So those are just the little tweaks that like I would make personally.
Definitely co-sign on that lack of cramp thing. I had blocked it out during my pitch, so it didn't even
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would have also loved an evil female character as well that wasn't just the like slutty vampire girls at the actual like prom. I would have liked to seen maybe another acolyte, something in there, or have Lothos be a female character instead of a male character. I think it could have also added a really interesting twist to this in a way, but also not like demonizing women. I think that's a fine line that we can't really trust Jaws or these older men on this picture with. So, it's one of those things that I think keeping most of the bones of this true. But I definitely like that she and Pike end up together with at the end. I also would love to see more of their like continuity. Cause like also the idea of them becoming a little bit of like an April O'Neil, Casey Jones kind of pairing is really cool for me. And so that's, again, I want to see more of a lot of these characters. And so I think that exhibits good writing in the end and good development that we want to see more of. Like, even if it's just those three characters, I would really like to see that. Or have Amelin. One more thing. I would have liked to seen the Hilary Swank character get bit, but just disappear. We don't see her show back up. And then she show up like Harmony as a vampire in the second one. And so it's one of those things that Buffy's like, what? No, you literally were such an asshole to me in life. And now she's literally given her those powers over Buffy. Could have led to a really interesting story for a second one. So a lot of mine is in contingent upon a second and third film, I think would be. Because for some reason, I love the idea of New York for a second film and London for a third one, and play with the idea of werewolves in London for a third film.
Yeah. I mean, these are all really similar to like what I would kind of bring to this all, because like, again, we all just generally like this movie pretty well. And it's like, well, what areas could it refine? Lothos is one of the sticking points, like the fact that we don't really understand what he's trying to do and like what the nature of his relationship with past Slayers are, and just comes off as a creepy old man, is sort of like the thing that sort of stands out about this whole thing. So I like my thought would be like, it'd be really nice if we had this sort of cycle of like, my thought is that if Lothos actually needed to drink the Slayer's blood to continue to live, like he was in a particularly like weird state of undeath, like where his covens are maintained by him, like do the whole like the sire, if the sire dies, everyone else dies kind of situation. And so that they are incentivized to keep him alive, because throughout the movie, up until we get to the end, they are bringing victims to Lothos to drink. And so an idea of like, okay, well, but then a mature Slayer like that is the blood that allows him to perpetuate his life cycle that has already been kind of damaged. Like Lothos should have like some kind of injury or something, like a Slayer almost killed him. And that drinking of Slayer blood is the only thing that really allows him to like reinvigorate himself each time. So that you can, again, it's kind of like the Master in season 1 of Buffy, but like play with it so that there is like a logical cycle here about like why they exist, like why Lothos like waxes and wanes in power throughout this all. You saying Blood Moon is good. I was looking up like, well, I guess it could be like the vernal equinox, but that's too regular. But you could get some sort of like metaphor about like when the sun starts to be out longer or something to that effect. But like like some kind of like regular cycle, or if it's just that the Slayer has to come of age, like if it's the Slayer's birthday, literally is like one of the things that become like they go from being like targeted just kind of casually to being like targeted very directly, like, oh, on the 18th birthday, the Slayer's blood will allow Lothos to live for another 3 decades or whatever, however they want to define that kind of cycle right there. I think that particular stake is the thing that would be really impactful here, and it would give us a chance to explain like Lothos's drive. What is Merrick's relationship to that? You could say that Merrick whatever balance of good and evil. If you don't want to say angel, or if you don't want to like, not angel, the character, but like an angel as opposed to a demon, like if you want like whatever sort of heavenly force, whatever thing is going on, like set up that sort of juxtaposition there. And like not all vampires are sired by Lothos, but Lothos is a particularly powerful one that continues to function and has resisted slayers more readily than a lot of other vampires have. Like so that you kind of like create the stake of like, no, yeah, like slayers are really good at killing vampires in general, but Lothos is particularly good at killing slayers. And like that's part of that cycle there. And then you could also sort of address a question that I had lingering the whole time, which was in this movie, it looks like everyone who gets bitten turns into a vampire. So what happened to all the previous slayers? And if they just they just explain the thing they say in the show, which is that like, no, you have to do the whole like cross sucking thing. And that like, if you drain them totally dry, like they'll die. And that's why they never have a slayer there, because Lothos has to drink the slayer dry every time. And that's the only way that Lothos is going to continue to exist. And if Lothos dies, all these other vampires die. And then maybe you can set up that like Amelin is not one of Lothos's entities, like maybe it's Lothos's brother or something, or like like sired by the same, like in the same coven, and like is the only person that Lothos trusts while not being able to whatever, explain that part. And then one of the reasons why Lothos can be established to be so deadly is that he is so mesmerizing, that his presence is so engrossing, and that he is naturally hypnotic in a way that other vampires are not. And that's why he's so good at killing slayers, because like everyone who sees him when he's at his strength, like not maybe at the first point in the movie, but like once he is drunk of enough young people or something like that, where his vitality itself allows him to just like override a person's ability to defend themselves. And that's why he's so dangerous to slayers, because when he's in his prime, you can't really face him off. And like Buffy being able to resist at the end should be a big detail. So that's like my big part there. And then, yeah, more leather. Like have them dress in ways that look cool. Like that's like the vampires who are just students are like fine, but like all of the vampires just need to look really fucking cool, and like really 90s cool. And I think that we're not getting that right here. Like if this had kind of a similar like design aesthetic to Bram Stoker's, which admittedly came out the same year, so I don't know how much you'd be able to like really like figure out what like what Coppola was doing for that one. But like, we bring up Lost Boys, have some like of those creepy elements, but like have it be creepy in a sexy way. Like, because the vampires in this movie are not sexy, and Lothos kind of should be a sexy vampire for him to do all the things he does. And it's Rutger Hauer, who can be a sexy vampire if he wants to. They're just not playing him that way. So like, take the cloak. The cloak's great, but like have everything else like just reek of sex appeal in this like kind of like off-putting European kind of way that would like make everyone be like a little uncomfortable to be in the room with him, because you're pretty sure that at some point his mouth is going to be on you, regardless of how that mouth is on you.
Well, it's because right now he looks like he's a Rex Manning cosplayer, like, frankly, right. Even though that movie wasn't out yet. But
I mean, I hear you, but I kind of like that they're sexless, weird, awkward vampires. But go on.
Well, but Lothos does come off as a sexy vampire in terms of like what they're trying to do. It's just he's not designed appropriately like a sexy vampire. So like like she gets in bed with him. There's all these like creepy moments of that. He's like, she's mesmerized by him. It's all like the classic kind of like, oh, I've hypnotized this woman and she will be my bride now kind of stuff. But it's not actually being sold by his dialogue, by the actual costume design for him, by the makeup for him. He just doesn't come across that way. And I don't need the other vampires to be sexy, but Lothos kind of should be, and in that predatory way, because like he already is skeevy in this movie. Like he's already got like weirdly lusting after a high school girl, but so let's make that more of an understood threat.
I understand. I just also love the idea of like a vampire who's just like really like fashion challenged, who's just stuck in like a particular style. That has nothing to do. Your pitch is good and it's right. But I just personally just feel like it'd be really great for someone to be like, no, it comes back around again. It's fine. I'm just going to wear these bell bottoms. Go on. I'm sorry.
Well, it's funny. So you mentioned that when I was reading up on this movie, someone called out that in the first episode of the show, when Buffy spots a person by having like they're stuck in a dated look, that's supposed to be a callback to my keen fashion sense. Like that's how she's able to identify vampires. And I think that's cool. But in this movie, you couldn't do that because most of the vampires are her her contemporaries that have just been transformed. So that like you lose that element by way of it having, you know, by being effectively a plague that hits their community directly as opposed to an outside force coming in.
So I did have another thought of also something I would tweak a little bit at the end. I would save Merrick's death until the big battle with Lothos. I would have Lothos bite Buffy, Merrick come from behind and kill him, Lothos turning around like to try to kill him, Lothos then like being interrupted or drops Buffy, kills Merrick and then turns around and then Buffy is there to go and that kind of be. So then in those moments after she realizes she's triumphant, she then turns around that Merrick is literally dead. So that she does have that support going into that battle, though I don't know how.
The Merrick death where it happens is like the Dark Night of the Soul kind of moment in like your screenplay structure. So like it's hard to say when exactly it should occur, but like that would be a good driving force for her to break her fascination with Lothos, because like the way it happens in the movie where it's like, oh, the music just stops and that's sort of like, oh, it's like this foretelling kind of component, like doesn't really work in terms of selling that part of it. Like something kind of needs to be more forcing her out of whatever trance, but also we need to see more of the trance at that point.
Well, also like maybe this idea that the power that Lothos is gaining, actually Buffy then keeps, and no Slayer has ever gotten to keep that power. So she literally, I don't want to say like ascends or transcends into something else, but we see this moment of like, maybe that's when her like super strength unlocks. Maybe that is something that she suddenly feels a difference. And she like, it's just a moment of just, we can tell that she feels a little different, but like it then could be explained more. But again, I still like that idea. I want her to just be a little stronger.
Well, going off your Blood Moon idea, like if like they note it kind of feels like it in the movie that like by him not successfully biting her when he was going for it, all of a sudden like she's now in empowered form that she can actually take him on. So like if you went with some sort of visual signifier of that, like whatever, you know, if it's a celestial body, if it's a lunar eclipse, if it, you know, whatever kind of thing you want to do with it, if it's like some alignment of the stars into an upside down crucifix, how about, you know, like, like whatever point when that occurs, like that's the spot where Lothos has to kill her to like reset his vitality. And then, and maybe it's like it also allows him to sort of remain in a more human form, and so he becomes more monstrous as they fight. But that's also when Buffy's strength is unlocked, and like you can do that whole type of thing. Like that would be really cool. It's kind of supported by the text, and then that actually gets you to the Buffy of the series being like more super strong.
Because even in, you know, this is referencing the final episode, that moment where we see Willow do the spell and all of the girls who are potentials, we're seeing them like the girl that's being hit by her dad, or the girl that's like the like 8-year-old girl with the bat. They like look up and they suddenly realize something is different. So it's not even like a signifier, but in that moment, I know I, as a fan watching the finale, lost my shit because it was like, oh, this is so cool. And it didn't even have to be a big thing. But if they had set up this, again, we've all talked about it, this stakes of the storytelling of why Lothos has to do it at this moment. And of course, it also happens to be prom that night. It's just that those two things are, I agree with you, Case, the most of all, that like we need a time limit to feel why the time is so pushing for us for this to happen.
Yeah, Lothos comes back very specifically, like he had been maybe in stasis or something. And like that's why he's like very weak at the beginning and why they like kind of like wake him up, you know, which they never really explain. And then like they start feeding him so that he's ready to be there at that moment. And all these vampires require that of him because otherwise they're all going to be destroyed. Yeah. So like, I think we're all kind of on the same page here. Like, you know, it's a pretty good movie. There's a lot to really like about this movie. You kind of have to check out some of like from some of your like thoughts about it all, because like it's kind of a goofy movie, but like you get a lot of love with like Stephen Root's like rant about LSD is so great. And I normally don't pay attention to it because I'm normally like paying attention to Buffy, but this is like the first time where I was like really like locked on him trying to explain just like how weird everything was while he was tripping balls. I'm like, that's just great. You just gave a great actor a chance just to like riff for a minute there, and he did it spectacularly. Like this movie is so much fun as it is, and it would be nice if it was like a little bit better and if people really loved it, but I think like it is a cult classic now.
1,000%.
Yeah.
And my mom was ahead of the curve, so it was usually a good good sign.
Yeah, she was she's very ahead of the curve.
Yeah, Mama Alisea is definitely our North Star on this show.
I think that just means y'all have to have Sam's mom onto the show.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know. I would have to go to her house to set up the recording for her. I don't know if that's going to happen.
Maybe for episode 200, it would be fun.
Maybe for Highlander, the Quickening.
Because I mean,
wait, I can't get up there in time to help you set up at all. Like, we're doing that next.
Oh no! Right, that's next week. Crap. Oh well, Mom can't be on.
It's always next week.
Sorry, we spoiled it for everyone. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. We spoiled it for everybody.
Sorry. Normally, we try to like play it a little closer to the vest in terms of what our episode roadmap is. But yeah. Anyway, Maddie, thank you for bringing this movie to us for this. Thank you for organizing a Buffy thing. Like, just whatever.
Yeah.
Are you calling it an event or just like?
I mean, I think it's just our two shows currently. So like, it's just for me because Buffy is so special to me and so important to me that I wanted to just do something because we did the giant Pokemon event last year, and then Hans organized the awesome Batman event this year. So I wanted to do a little something for Buffy just because she slays my heart. It is very important to me, and it is kind of a pinnacle also of like my queer development as a human. So this had to be included, and of course I had to come back to the show that started it all. So we just had to do that.
Well, it is great to have you back on. It's been too long, but it's always just like fun to chat with you about stuff. And this is a really fun one to talk about because like, it's not a movie that I have a lot of like, here's how I would like intricately like restructure this whole thing. But it is a movie I just love to revisit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So outside of doing your own Buffy crossover material, what do you have going on? Like, where can people find you?
So you can find us at SMC Pod or SSC Podcast on Instagram and Twitter. We're at Saturday Morning Confidential on Facebook. And about the time that I am releasing this, I have a brand new show debuting called Exit Stage Death, which is the chilling true crime stories behind your favorite musicals and Broadway theaters. And so that is available at Exit Stage Death on all major podcatchers. So that's just kind of the realm I am living in currently. And we are kind of loving it.
Awesome. Sam, where can people find you?
They can find me here, of course, right here at Another Pass, and nowhere else because I am currently still watching many, many episodes of Buffy so that I can speak with Matty about the entire series. So I am in a room by myself, clutching a steak and a cross and praying for myself and getting ready with all the lyrics I still remember from Once More with Feelings. Yeah, I will be singing along to the whole thing. So I will be doing it by myself so that no one else has to be inflicted by me doing all the voices all of the time. But if you have any complaints, as always, you can find Case
on Twitter at Case Aiken. You can find the podcast at Another Pass. You can find more episodes of this show at certainpov.com, where you can find tons of other great shows like Saturday Morning Confidential. Or you can find when this is coming out, we are in the midst of relaunching the United States of Women, which is a really cool podcast that used to be part of Geek Elite Media. But since that network has folded, we have brought it on. So the show tracks down important women in each state, going in the order that the state was ratified. So each season's 8 episodes looking at 8 different women. So throughout April, we're running the whole the whole original 4 seasons. And then in May, we're picking up, resuming the season that got caught off in the middle. So check that out. It's United States of Women. It's really cool. Jessica and Elizabeth are awesome and very knowledgeable and have done a ton of research into really cool people who just aren't really talked about as much because there's so much great man history. And sometimes we need to look at the great women. So check that out at certainpov.com, where you can also find a link to our Discord. Come interact, get sneak peeks about upcoming episodes. Just chat with us about video games or whatever the fuck you want. Like, it's a great time. We have a great community that we're building there. So check all that out and then tune back in for our next episode. We kind of spoiled it already, but Sam, you might as well say officially what our next episode is, right?
I cannot wait, you guys. Next time on Another Pass, we'll be doing Highlander 2, The Quickening, not with Mama Alisea. But until then, if you enjoyed this, pass it on.
thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Alicea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Matt Storm. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan.
By Matty Limerick. Let me say your name correctly. Sorry.
Hello there. My name is Leo, and I'm here to tell you all about my Dune podcast, Gom Jabbar, the perfect podcast for new fans of Dune and longtime fans of Dune alike. My co-host Abu and I dive deep in both spoiler-free and spoiler-heavy episodes covering Frank Herbert's original novels, the film adaptations, the board games, the comics, the upcoming video games, the HBO TV series, anything we can get our hands on. We even have a companion book club series to make your first or your 15th read-through even better. So, if you recently saw Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Dune, or if you read Dune back when it came out in 1965, this is the podcast for you. You can find Gom Jabbar on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, pretty much anywhere you find your podcasts, and we hope you join us on the Golden Path.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.